At 19, my parents threw me out. All I had were the clothes I was wearing. Their last words to me were, "You will never amount to anything." 10 years later, they had a reservation at their favorite restaurant, the most exclusive spot in the city, the one they bragged about to all their friends. What they didn't know was that the failure they disowned was the one they'd have to ask for the best table. This is the story of how I bought the one place they loved most. The fall our family portrait was a lie. To everyone else, we looked perfect. My father was a respected surgeon. My mother chaired every important charity. My older brother was already at a top law firm. And then there was me. I was supposed to be the next perfect piece in the puzzle. Headed for a fancy university and a life that looked good on paper. The pressure wasn't a sudden storm. It was the climate I grew up in. Every dinner was a performance. It wasn't, "How was your day?" but "What did you achieve?" Grades were for bragging rights. Friendships were social currency. I felt like I was living under a spotlight, and I was. Suffocating. Their favorite restaurant was a place called La Belle Vie. It was the stage for every family announcement, every birthday, every anniversary, old world charm, new world prices. My parents didn't love the food. They loved what eating there said about them. It was their cathedral of status. I always hated it. The place felt as hollow as our dining room. The food was technically perfect, but it had no soul, just like our conversations. The breaking point wasn't some big dramatic explosion. It was a quiet decision I made alone in my room. I didn't want to be a lawyer or a doctor. That world felt like a beautifully decorated prison. My passion, the thing that made me feel alive, was in the kitchen. Not my mother's show kitchen, but the messy, chaotic world of creating food. I was secretly reading cookbooks, watching old culinary shows, and teaching myself to cook when no one was home. I found a community college with a great culinary arts program. It felt real. It felt like me. I decided to tell them at dinner. Looking back, it was a terrible idea. But I was 19. I thought passion could conquer anything. I waited for a pause. In my father's story about a hospital gala, "Dad, Mom," I started, my voice shaking a little. "I've made a decision. Not going to the university." My father put his fork down with a slow, deliberate click. My mother's smile froze on her face. "What do you mean? You're not going?" my father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I've enrolled in the culinary program at the community college," I said, trying to sound confident. "I want to be a chef." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. First confusion, then disgust. My mother spoke first, her voice a horrified whisper. "A chef? Like a line cook? You want to work in a hot, greasy kitchen?" My father just laughed. Not a friendly laugh. It was a bark of pure contempt. "A chef? After everything we've given you. It's the tutors, the private school, the connections. You want to throw it all away to flip burgers?" "It's not about flipping burgers, Dad. It's art. It's about making people happy." Happy. He stood up, his chair scraping the floor. "Don't you talk to me about happiness. We're talking about your life, our reputation. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? What will we tell people? That our son is learning to chop onions at a community college with dropouts." That word dropouts just hung in the air. The argument spiraled from there. I tried to defend my dream, and they tore it apart. To them, this wasn't just a different path. It was a deliberate act of rebellion meant to humiliate them. It was a rejection of everything they stood for. And, in a way, they were right. The final blow came when my father walked to the front door and opened it. "If you're so determined to live that life," he said, his voice completely flat, "then you can start right now. If you walk out that door, don't come back. This house is for people with ambition, not for people who want to play with their food." My mother stood right behind him, arms crossed, her face a mask of disappointment. There was no plea in her eyes, just cold agreement. They were a united front. I looked at these two people who were supposed to love me no matter what, and I saw strangers. Their love had terms and conditions, and I had just broken the contract. With tears in my eyes, I walked past them. I didn't grab a jacket, didn't grab my wallet. I just walked out into the night. As I hit the sidewalk, my father's voice cut through the darkness one last time. You'll never amount to anything. The door closed, the lock clicked. I was 19, and I was completely, terrifyingly alone. The struggle and the rise the first few weeks were a blur. I crashed on a friend's couch, feeling like a ghost in his small apartment, trying not to be a burden. But the shame was the worst part. It was a constant whisper, my father's words echoing. In my head, every time I had to ask for a meal, reality hit me hard when I tried to enroll in the culinary program. I had no money for tuition, for knives, for a uniform. The dream that cost me my family was a dream I couldn't even afford. For a week, I just drifted. I walked around the city for hours, ending up in libraries just to have a place to exist. I was drowning. The turning point wasn't some grand epiphany. It was my own empty stomach. I was walking past a small Italian diner, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes was so good it almost made me cry. In the window was a handwritten sign, "Dishwasher wanted." It wasn't being a chef. It was the lowest job in the kitchen. But it was a start. I walked in, and a gruff, overweight man named Sal looked me up and down, saw the desperation in my eyes, and just said, "You can start tonight. Don't steal and don't be late." That night, I was thrown into the fire of a real kitchen. It was a symphony of clattering pans, shouting orders, and the constant hiss of the grill. For 10 hours, I scrubbed pots, polished glasses, and hauled racks of dishes. My hands were raw, my back ached, and I was soaked. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. At the end of my shift, Sal shoved a plate of spaghetti and meatballs at me. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. It wasn't just food, it was respect. I worked at that diner for a year. First in, last out. I watched everything. I watched how the line cooks moved, how Sal, the owner and head chef, could taste a sauce and know exactly what it needed. I started asking questions. At first, they were annoyed by the dishwasher asking about bechamel sauce, but I didn't stop. Eventually, Sal started letting me do basic prep during slow hours. My knife skills were terrible, but I practiced and practiced. I saved every dollar I could. I moved from my friend's couch to a tiny windowless room I shared with another cook. I finally enrolled in that culinary program, taking night classes after my shifts. I was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline. My parents' rejection had turned into fuel. I was going to prove them wrong, not for them, but for me. Years passed. I moved on from Sal's to other kitchens. I was a prep cook, a line cook, a sous chef. I absorbed everything French technique, Asian flavors, the brutal math of food costing. I developed a philosophy about food. A great restaurant isn't about being exclusive. It's about being authentic and making every guest feel welcome. It was everything La Belle Vie was not. I hadn't spoken to my parents. I heard bits and pieces about their life through the grapevine. I knew they were still regulars at La Belle Vie, still celebrating my brother's promotions there. The restaurant was still the symbol of the world I'd been kicked out of. One night, I was having a beer with a food supplier. He was complaining about a client being late on payments. "It's a shame," he said. "Used to be the best place in the city. Now it's a ghost ship." "What place?" I asked. "La Belle Vie." He said. My heart skipped a beat. What happened? The old owners sold it to some investment group that knows nothing about food. They cut corners, the chef mailed it in, and the place is bleeding money. An idea sparked in my mind. It started as a dark fantasy, a perfect revenge. But the more I thought about it, the less it was about revenge and more about a challenge. I knew what was wrong with that place because I'd felt it as a kid. It had no soul. Taking a failing, legendary restaurant and bringing it back to life, that would be the ultimate test. For the next 2 months, I became a spy. I ate at La Belle Vie once a week. The supplier was right. The place was dying. The staff didn't care, the service was slow, and the food was a pale imitation of what it once was. My steak was overcooked. The passion was gone. I knew with absolute certainty I could save it. I spent the next year putting a plan together. I cashed out my savings and wrote a business proposal. The banks practically laughed me out of their offices. A sous chef with no ownership experience asking for a fortune to buy a failing restaurant. It was a joke. I was about to give up when I thought of Sal. I went back to the old diner. He was still there, older and grumpier, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. I laid my business plan out on one of the checkered tablecloths and walked him through my vision. Locally sourced ingredients. Classic techniques with a modern twist. Warm hospitality instead of stuffy formality. I wanted to bring the heart back to La Belle Vi. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "It's a big risk, kid." He said, "This place will eat you alive if you let it." "I know," I said, "but I can do it." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "I know you can." He didn't have the money himself, but he co-signed the loan. He bet his life savings on me. That trust meant more than any apology from my parents ever could. 3 months later, the deal was done. I stood on the street, staring up at the iconic sign of La Belle Vie, holding a set of keys. I was 29 years old, no longer a failure. I was the owner of my parents' favorite restaurant. The turnaround was the hardest work of my life. I was there 18 hours a day. I closed the restaurant for a month. I met with every staff member. Some I let go, but the ones who were just beaten down, the ones who still had a spark I invested in them. We trained, we tasted, we talked. I threw out the old menu and built a new one from scratch. Each dish had a story. When we reopened, it was slow at first. But then a food blogger praised our revitalized classic. Word of mouth started to spread. People talked about the food, but more than that, they talked about how the place felt. It felt alive. Within a year, we were profitable. Within 2, we were one of the hottest reservations in the city. I hadn't done it out of spite. I'd done it because I loved it. I poured all my pain and passion into those walls and created something beautiful. I had my own family now, the one I'd built in the heat of the kitchen. And I was finally at peace, or so I thought. The reckoning-ette happened on a Tuesday. We'd just gotten a glowing review in the city's magazine, and the phone hadn't stopped ringing. I was in my small office overlooking the dining room when my hostess, Maya, knocked on the door. "Chef, there's a reservation for 2 at 7:30. The name is Dr. and Mrs. Sterling. Sterling, my last name." It felt like a word from a forgotten language. I just stared at her. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Yeah, everything's fine, Maya. Put them at table 7. Table 7 was a corner booth, private, with a perfect view. 'Twas the table my father always demanded. I didn't know if I was honoring an old habit or preparing for a showdown. For the next hour, I couldn't focus. All I could see was my father's sneering face. All I could hear was the click of that lock. Why now? Did they know? It seemed impossible. I'd kept my name out of the press on purpose. At 7:29, I saw them. They looked older. My father's hair was more silver. There were fine lines around my mother's eyes. But they carried themselves with the same unshakable entitlement. I watched on the security camera as Maya led them to the table. As they settled in, a strange calm washed over me. The fear was gone. This was a chapter that needed to be closed on my terms. I took off my chef's apron and walked out of my office. The buzz of the dining room, the clink of glasses, the smell of fresh bread. This was my world. They were just visitors here. I walked to their table. They hadn't seen me yet. My father was lecturing my mother about the wine list. "Good evening," I said. My voice was steady. They both looked up, and time just stopped. I watched a parade of emotions cross their faces. Confusion, Then a flicker of horrified recognition. My mother's face crumbled. Her hand flew to her mouth. My father's face went hard. The recognition was there, but it was buried under a wave of cold fury and pure embarrassment. To be confronted by the son he'd written off in the middle of his favorite status symbol, it was a nightmare he could never have imagined. "You?" he breathed. "Me," I said, with a small, sad smile. "Welcome to my restaurant. Is the table okay?" My mother was speechless. My father, always needing to be in control, recovered faster. "What is the meaning of this?" he growled, trying to keep his voice down. "You work here." It was so perfectly him. The idea that I could own the place was so far outside his reality. He thought I was a waiter here to embarrass him. "I do work here," I replied calmly. "I also sign the paychecks. I bought La Belle Vie 2 years ago." The color flooded his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around the packed dining room, at the happy customers, at the seamless service, and then back at me. The reality was undeniable. My mother finally found her voice. "Michael," she whispered. It was the first time she'd used my name in a decade. We didn't know." "It's beautiful." It was a clumsy attempt to smooth over 10 years of absence. But I wasn't that 19-year-old kid anymore. This wasn't about forgiveness. This was about damage control. This was about them rewriting the story so they wouldn't have to live with being so catastrophically wrong. "I know you didn't know," I said. "I have to get back to my kitchen. Please enjoy your meal. It's on the house." I turned to walk away, but my father's voice stopped me. "Wait." I turned back. The anger was gone, replaced by a calculating look. "Michael, son, we need to talk. We've missed you. Family is family. Maybe you can come for dinner on Sunday." And there it was, the invitation. Not 10 years ago when I was sleeping on a floor, but now that I was a success. Now that I wasn't an embarrassment, but a story they could spin into. Our son, the brilliant restaurateur. We always knew he had it in him. I looked at them, and I didn't feel hatred. I just felt sad and peaceful. I had spent so long running on the fuel of their rejection, but somewhere along the way, I'd started running on my own passion. I didn't need their approval anymore. "Thank you for the offer, Dad," I said, and my voice was my own. "But I'm busy on Sundays. That's my day with my family." Gestured out at the dining room, at my team, at the life I had built. He probably thought I was being clever, but I meant it. Sal and his wife were my family now. My staff were my brothers and sisters. I gave them a final nod and walked away without looking back. Their chapter was over. I had written my own ending. Success isn't about proving your doubters wrong. It's about proving yourself right. But it does make you wonder about forgiveness. What would you have done? Would you have let them back in? Let me know in the comments. They finished their meal in silence and left. They've never been back. I sometimes hear that my mother tells a very different version of this story at her luncheons, one where she always supported my artistic spirit. It doesn't matter. Her story has no power over me. My life is here in the controlled chaos of this kitchen. I found my worth not in my parents' approval, but in the heat of the fire. I was told I'd amount to nothing. But that rejection, that pain, became the very thing that forged my independence. I didn't buy this place to get back at them. I bought it to reclaim a piece of my own story, to turn a place of painful memories into proof of my own strength. And in the end, that's the only success that matters. I'm a chef, my business owner, okay? And I am finally, completely my own man.